Effective communication is a quality of life issue. In fact, good communication is the lifeblood of healthy relationships. And healthy relationships keep us healthy mentally and emotionally. So no matter how much we think we know about communication, it's always good for us to spend a few minutes reviewing what works and what to watch out for. Today we're just going to look at 3 points, and here they are. First one is wait for a green light. Second one, take 100% responsibility for successful communication. And number 3 is balance the ratio between helping and harming. Well, let's get started with that first one. What does a green light look like for having effective communication? Well, here's what it doesn't look like. It doesn't happen when the person you want to talk to is already upset, when they're angry, when they're tired, when they're hungry. Stress and distraction are toxic for good communication. So a green light is when the circumstances are ideal, when you have a peaceful, safe environment with mutual respect. Now, just to help us to be vigilant and diligent about achieving this proper state, imagine somebody scoring a touchdown before the game starts. You see, it doesn't matter that they made it all the way to the end zone. If the score isn't being counted yet, then it was just a waste of time and energy. And all of the effort that we put forth to have effective communication can be just like that. It can be like a wasted touchdown. So look for that ideal circumstance and wait for it if you have to, because it just doesn't count if you do it prematurely. Well, what's the second point about 100% responsibility? A lot of times we tell people that and they say, no, relationship should be 50-50. He needs to take 50% responsibility, or she needs to be responsible too. But here's the point. Effective communication is not about the message that you send to the other person. It's about the message that they hear. And the same thing happens in reverse. And somebody's got to be responsible, not just 50%, not just 70%, but 100% responsible for making sure that that's what happens. Because let's say that we're 99% responsible and there's just a little room for error. That's like a pinhole in a siphon hose. You could have water flowing beautifully through a siphon, and one tiny pinhole will disrupt the whole flow. And now we're off doing damage repair somewhere. So how do we do that? How do we take 100% responsibility? Well, first point is it's not efficient. Efficient communication is different from effective conversation. What we want to make sure is that the person understood what we said before they respond, and that we understand what they said before we respond. So even though this is a little awkward, a lot of times we're in such a hurry that we want to go ahead and respond to what they just said, but we'll save ourselves a lot of grief and a lot of damage that we have to repair later if we just make sure 100% that we heard them correctly. Now, there was a marriage counselor that said that this was perhaps the most effective piece of advice that he ever gave to his clients. And he said it worked 100% of the time when they did it. So here's how it works. Person A says what they want to say, and person B does not respond to it until they play it back. They say, here's what I heard you to say. And then the person that spoke first has an opportunity to confirm or deny. Now, it's interesting what happens. Sometimes the person who spoke says, yeah, that's what I said, but now that I hear you say it back, I kind of want to change it. Or they say, no, that's not what I said at all. And then they rephrase what they were trying to say. Now, the tragedy is when we spend a lot of time arguing with something that they didn't even intend to say. So take 100% responsibility for making sure you've heard them clearly, and make sure that they understand what you're saying. And even though that's inefficient, it's going to save us all a lot of grief over the long haul. Now, point number 3 is balance the helpfulness and harmfulness of every conversation. It's not possible to have conversations with the people that are closest to us without ever doing any harm. That's a nice dream. But if we have emotions involved, there's going to be some negativity. And honestly, we need to be able to talk about things that are potentially harmful. But here's what we do want to control. We want to control the balance between the two. So think about it this way. In your checkbook, you've got deposits and you've got withdrawals. And what we hope for is that the amount of the deposits exceeds the amount of the withdrawals. Now, some people, every conversation they have is leaving their partner or the person they're communicating with less. They're doing harm, and they're ruining their relationships one conversation at a time. How much better if we make it an active project to have positive outcomes? If every conversation could end with us making a deposit, what a valuable way to live. And that's going to help us to really be more successful in all our communication in every relationship that we have. So what does that look like? How do we avoid causing harm in conversation? Well, one tip that's given over and over again is to listen well. Listen actively. Really pay attention to the other person. So that may mean we have to schedule this conversation for a time when we can do that, when we're not multitasking, we're not divided in our focus. But remember, the greatest gift that you and I can give to each other is the gift of our undivided attention. And people just don't get enough conversations where somebody really listens to them. So that's the first thing, is really listen. Here's a side point. Don't interrupt. Now, we've all done it. In fact, it's part of the communication style for a lot of people to just blurt in. But the less we interrupt, the more helpful our conversations will be and the less harmful they will be. Here's another point. Don't argue. Now, it's impossible to avoid all arguing, but there's some skills here that will really be valuable for us to acquire. So instead of saying, oh, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, or how could you feel that way? Change your attitude and say, how could somebody that I have so much respect for have a point of view that's so different from my own? See the difference in the spirit between those two conversations? So what we want to do is ask questions, not to be manipulative or controlling, because people can tell. They know if you're just asking questions to show that their point of view is absurd, but ask sincere questions so that we can completely understand what it is they're saying and where they're coming from. Now, in the face of those conversations, sometimes people say, you know, that's not really what I mean at all. And that's very helpful. It's much better than trying to prove them wrong. But even if they don't, even if they never see the folly of their point of view, if we listen respectfully, draw them out, and avoid arguing with what they say, it's very likely that they're going to ask us how we feel. Now, that's our turn to go ahead and express ourselves. Again, be careful. It could be tempting to go ahead and say, well, let me tell you why I'm right here. But a far better way is just to plainly state the facts as you see them, and then let the person make up their mind about how they're going to feel going forward. It's good to take the long game into consideration. Sometimes we have a conversation with somebody, they disagree with us. We end on good terms, though, and then a week later or a month later, they come back and they begin telling us what we told them the other time. In fact, it can even be a little discouraging. Be like, wait, that's what I told you, and now you're coming and telling me. But in reality, we shouldn't care. You see, if they adopt our point of view at some point, that's a win. So by way of review, just remember, wait for a green light. Don't try to score a touchdown before it counts. Take 100% responsibility and make sure that the message you sent is the one they receive and the one they're sending is the one you're hearing. And then finally, avoid doing damage. Try to keep that balance in check between helpful conversation and harmful conversation. And if we do that, if you and I really make it a point to get good at healthy conversation, it's going to help our relationships, and those relationships then are going to help us with our mental and emotional health.